The world was new and terrible, born in smoke and baptized in fear. The sun, a bloodshot eye, was just beginning to slit the horizon, its weak light struggling to cut through the greasy pillar of black smoke that marked the grave of sanctuary. Silas kept his gaze fixed forward, his left arm crooked around the woman in his saddle, his right hand pointing west. "That way," he said, his voice a low gravel, "to redemption." The woman, Ilara, didn't respond. She was a dead weight against his chest, her body slumped in a way that was deeper than mere exhaustion. It was a surrender. Her breathing was shallow, a small, bird-like flutter he could barely feel. He'd pulled her from the inferno of the trading post's main hall, the last one alive. The men who had done this, a band of raiders known only as the Ash Riders, had been thorough. They hadn't just killed, they had obliterated. Buster, his bay gelding, sidestepped nervously, nostrils flaring at the acrid smell of burning pine and things that smelled worse. Silas patted the horse's neck, a grim murmur of reassurance. He could feel the heat on his back, a persistent, angry hand pressing them onward. He'd arrived too late. He was always too late. He'd seen the smoke from 10 miles out and had ridden Buster into a lather, but he knew. You always know. He'd found her huddled behind an overturned root cellar door, the flames licking at the wood. She hadn't screamed or fought him. She had simply looked up, her eyes vacant, her face a mask. The Ash Riders had left their mark. 2 thick, horizontal bars of crimson paint, like bloody tears, were smeared from the outside of her eyes to her temples. The silence mark. Silas had only heard whispers of it, a ritual branding by the raiders' leader, Court, who believed it stole a captive's voice and will, leaving them a perfect, hollow shell. Looking at Elra, Silas was inclined to believe the rumor. Her dress, once a simple white cotton, was shredded and stained with soot and blood. Not her own, he'd checked. She was a ghost in his arms. He adjusted his grip, pulling her closer. She was small, and the tattered fabric of her dress offered no protection from the morning chill. He could feel the fine tremor in her limbs. He shifted his gaze from the horizon to the vast, empty plain behind them. His eyes, trained by years of tracking men who didn't want to be found, scanned the RIDGELINE. There, a single rider, silhouetted against the rising, smoky sun, a speck of lethal intent, a scout. The Ash Riders weren't done. They knew one was missing. "Hup, Buster," Silas growled, nudging the horse into a steady, ground-eating trot. The rider in the distance didn't move, just watched. A shepherd counting his flock. Silas didn't look back again. He kept his gaze locked on the west, on the distant, hazy mountains that held the promise of a town called Redemption. It was a long ride, with a ghost for a companion and a demon at their heels. It felt like an impossible one. They rode 4 hours. The sun climbed, burning off the smoke, but replacing it with the clean, unfiltered heat that baked the cracked earth. This was the High Lonesome, a stretch of godless land that tolerated life, but did not nurture it. Sagebrush and bitterweeds were the only vegetation. The world was a panorama of brown, gray, and blinding blue dot. Silas rode with the Winchester resting across his lap. His hat was pulled low, his eyes constantly scanning, moving from the horizon to Ilara and back. She hadn't moved. Her head rested against his shoulder, her cheek pressed to the worn leather of his vest. He wondered if she was even conscious. Around noon, he stopped. He slid from the saddle, his knees cracking in protest. He reached up for Ilara. "We need to rest the horse. Drink." His arms ached as he lifted her down. She was light, but it was a limp, unhelpful weight. Her legs buckled, and he had to half-carry her to the meager shade of a high-backed boulder. She slid to the ground, her back against the rock, her eyes open but seeing nothing. The crimson marks were stark in the harsh light. He uncorked his canteen and knelt in front of her. "You have to drink." She stared past him. He sighed, dipped his bandana into the precious water, and gently dabbed her cracked lips. "Alara," he said, "the name a guess." He'd heard one of the burning men gasp it. "Ilara, you're out. You're safe. But you have to help me. Drink." He pressed the mouth of the canteen to her lips and tilted it. Water trickled into her mouth and ran down her chin, cutting a clean path through the grime. She coughed, a dry, hacking sound, but she swallowed. A small victory. He sat back on his heels, taking a short pull from the canteen for himself. He watched her, a knot of frustration and a deeper, more familiar ache tightening in his gut. She reminded him of Sarah, his sister, captured by Comancheros years ago. By the time Silas had tracked them down and slaughtered them, it was 6 months too late. He'd found her alive, but her mind was gone, fled to a place he couldn't follow. She died 2 winters later, in a quiet room in a San Antonio mission. Without ever speaking his name again, he saw the same vacant terror in Ilara's eyes, a soul that had packed its bags. "He can't hurt you anymore," Silas said, the words feeling useless. "Court. His mark doesn't mean anything out here. It's just paint." He was talking to himself as much as to her. He'd spent a decade as a ranger, then a bounty hunter, living by a code of cold, hard transactions. This was different. This was charity, and it felt dangerously like penance. He was running from the smoke, but he was also running from the ghost of Sarah, from the man he'd been when he failed her. He stood and scanned their back trail. The lone rider was still there, pacing them. He'd kept his distance, maybe a mile or 2 back, all morning. He wasn't trying to catch them. Not yet. He was hurting them, or, more likely, he was waiting for the rest. "Time to go," Silas said, capping the canteen. He lifted Ilara again. This time, as he settled her in the saddle, he felt a flicker of resistance, a tensing of her muscles, a small, involuntary no. He swung up behind her, his movements economical and practiced. He gathered the reins. "Good," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "You're still in there." He pointed west again, an unconscious reflex. Redemption. The sun's relentless assault finally broke, bleeding into a bruised purple and orange sunset. The heat of the high lonesome was fickle. As soon as the light died, a profound cold seeped up from the ground. Silas had pushed Buster hard, and the horse was flagging. They needed to rest. More importantly, they needed to be out of sight. He found what he was looking for, a shallow, narrow canyon, little more than a fissure in the earth, carved by flash floods that hadn't come in a generation. It was tight, but it would hide them and their fire. He dismounted and, with the practiced ease of a man who had made his home in the wild for 20 years, helped Ilara down. He settled her against the canyon wall, wrapped in his bedroll. She was shaking, the thin dress offering no warmth. He built a small, smokeless fire of dry greasewood, the flames casting flickering, distorted shadows on the rock. He sat across from her, feeding bits of jerky into his mouth, his jaw working mechanically. He offered her a piece. She ignored it, her gaze fixed on the flames. He sighed, took out his knife, and shaved off thin slivers. "Eat," he commanded, his voice softened by the enclosed space. He held a piece out. Her eyes slowly tracked from the fire to his hand. He waited. 1 minute. 2. Her hand, raw and scraped, slowly lifted from her lap. Her fingers brushed his, and she took the sliver of jerky. She put it in her mouth and chewed, a slow, pained movement. It was more than a victory. It was a conversation. Silas let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He cut more pieces, laying them on the rock beside her. He went back to his own meal, the silence of the canyon amplifying the small sounds of the fire and their chewing. "The man who did this," Silas said, staring into the flames. "Court. I've heard of him. They say he was a preacher once, before the war. Says he's silencing the world so God can finally speak." He shook his head. Men will find any excuse to be monsters. He looked at Alara. Her eyes were on him now. The vacancy was still there, but it was thinner. There was something behind it, a flicker of awareness. "My sister," he said, the words tasting like rust. "Sarah, she was taken. Like you. Different men, same evil. When I got her back, she was ... quiet, like you." The silence mark isn't paint, Alara. It's fear. It's a brand on the inside. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "They told me she'd never come back. And she didn't. But I wasn't there for her. I was just ... angry. I never tried to reach her. I just pointed my anger at the next man, and the next." Alara watched him, her head tilted. The firelight danced on the crimson marks, making them look like fresh wounds. "I won't make that mistake again," he said quietly. He looked away, embarrassed by the confession. He took his canteen and moved to check on Buster, who was tethered at the canyon's entrance. As he stood, he felt a light touch on his sleeve. He froze. Alara was looking up at him. Her hand was on his arm. It was a feather-light touch, trembling, but it was there. Her eyes were clear, not just aware, but present. They were filled with a sorrow so vast it threatened to drown them both. She wasn't a ghost. She was a woman in agony. He placed his rough hand over hers. "It's all right," he said, his voice thick. "We rest. Tomorrow, we make for the dry river. We can follow it north. It'll shave a day off the ride." She didn't pull her hand away. She just nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Silas turned and walked to the mouth of the canyon, his heart a lead weight. He looked out at the plains, now a sea of silver under a full moon, and his blood ran cold. The lone rider was gone. It was the worst possible news. The scout hadn't been hurting them. He'd been pacing them, waiting for the others to catch up. And now, he was gone, which meant he had found them. He was bringing the rest. The hunt was over. The killing was about to begin. Silas didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the canyon wall, rifle in his lap, listening to the night sounds. Every gust of wind was the hoofbeat of an approaching horse. Every skitter of a lizard was the cocking of a hammer. Alara slept, a fitful, whimpering sleep, but the deepest he'd seen from her. The small act of eating, of reaching out, had exhausted her. He was glad for it. She would need the strength. Before the first hint of dawn, he had her awake and on the horse. He gave her the last of the jerky. He didn't eat. "They're coming," he said, not as a warning, but as a fact. "They're close. We have to ride hard. The dry river is our only chance." She was different this morning. She held the saddle horn, her back straight. She was still terrified, but she was no longer hollow. She was a live wire of fear. They rode out of the canyon, not into the sunrise, but north, toward a gray-white scar on the landscape. The dry river was a 50-yard wide bed of gravel and sand, with high sloping banks on either side. It was a perfect, exposed trap, but it was also the fastest way to the foothills. "If they come," Silas said, his voice loud over Buster's pounding hooves, "I'll put you in a washout. You stay down, no matter what. You hear me? No matter what." She nodded, her knuckles white on the horn. They'd been in the riverbed for less than 10 minutes when the riders appeared. 5 of them, cresting the eastern bank, dark figures against the pale sky. The scout was one of them. The one in the lead was a broad, tall man in a long duster. "Court Haya," Silas yelled, slapping Buster's rump. The horse surged forward. A rifle cracked, and a bullet whinned past Silas's ear. "Get low," he yelled at Alara, pushing her head down. Another shot. This one hit the gravel in front of them, spraying them with stinging rock. They were in a kill box. Silas spotted it, a deep arroyo, a tributary of the river, cutting into the bank. He yanked Buster's reins, skidding the horse to a halt. He was off the saddle before the horse even stopped. pulling Ilara down with him. He half threw her toward the shallow ditch. "Stay down. Don't move. Don't make a sound." He slapped Buster on the rump. "Go, boy, go." The horse, panicked, galloped on down the riverbed. A perfect distraction. Silas dropped to one knee at the edge of the arroyo, pulling his Winchester to his shoulder. The riders were charging, fanning out, 150 yards. He took a breath, sighted on the lead rider, let the breath out, squeezed the rifle, bucked. The lead rider, not Court, threw his arms wide and tumbled from his horse. 4 left. They split, 2 going for the horse, 2 charging him. Court was one of them. Silas worked the lever, fired, missed. The bullet kicked up sand, cursed. He lever-actioned again. The second rider was close now, 70 yards. He was raising his revolver. Silas fired. The man jerked, shot wild, and slumped over his saddle. His horse veered off. A bullet struck the gravel near Silas's head, peppering his face. He ducked, rolling into the arroyo, landing hard beside Ilara. She had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror so pure it was almost white. He heard the horses thundering closer. "Stay," he barked. He scrambled up the other side of the arroyo, coming up in the open. A gamble. Court and the scout were 50 yards out, dismounting. Court raised his rifle. Silas fired his Winchester, but the scout fired at the same time. A white-hot poker slammed into Silas's left shoulder. The force spun him around, and he dropped his rifle. He grunted, stumbling back, pulling his revolver. He fired twice. The scout fell. It was just Court. The preacher raider stood calmly, his long duster flapping. He wasn't even looking at Silas. He was looking into the arroyo, at Ilara, the marked one. Court's voice boomed, rich and terrible. "She is mine. The Lord marked her for me. You cannot steal what is God's." He started walking toward the ditch, a massive dragoon revolver in his hand. Silas, his left arm useless, his vision blurring, raised his own pistol. He thumbed the hammer. Click. Empty. "No," Silas whispered. He fumbled for the bullets on his belt with his good hand. Court smiled, a benevolent, terrifying smile. He raised his revolver, pointing it not at Silas, but at Ilara. "The flock must be cleansed," he said. And then, a sound shattered the morning. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, primal noise torn from the very bedrock of a soul. A scream of pure, undiluted rage that had been bottled for days, for years, for a lifetime. Elara. She was on her feet, her face a mask of tears and fury, the crimson paint running like war paint. The sound was so unexpected, so inhumanly loud, that Court flinched. His eyes snapped from Silas to her. It was a hesitation of less than a second. It was all Silas needed. He'd dropped his bullets. His gun was empty. His shoulder was on fire. But his hand found the boot knife. In one fluid, desperate motion, honed by 1,000 campfire-lit nights, Silas pivoted his body and threw the knife. His right arm, his last good limb, put everything he had into it. The blade spun twice, an arc of glittering steel, and buried itself to the hilt in Court's throat. Court's eyes went wide with shock. His mouth opened, but only a wet gurgle came out. He dropped his pistol. He clawed at the knife, his benevolent expression replaced by a mask of stunned, animal panic. He took 2 steps, fell to his knees, and then toppled face first into the sand. The silence that fell was heavier than the gunfire. It was absolute gunfire. It was absolute. The echoes of the scream and the thud of Court's body died, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling down the riverbed. Ilara stood frozen, her chest heaving, her hands still balled into fists. The crimson paint on her face was a ruin, cracked by sweat and tears. The silence mark was broken. Silas stared at Court's body, then at his own empty, shaking hand. The adrenaline began its retreat, and a wave of agonizing, Sickening pain flooded his shoulder. His vision swam. Silas, he grunted, stumbling back. His legs gave out, and he slid down the bank of the arroyo, landing in a heap. The movement broke Ilara's paralysis. "No," she whispered. The word was a croak, rusty from disuse. She scrambled to his side, her hands fluttering over his wound. It was a clean hole, but it was bleeding badly. "In my saddlebag," Silas panted, fighting the blackness. "Bottle, bandages." She didn't wait. She was up and running, sprinting down the riverbed toward Buster, who had stopped 100 yards away and was now nervously cropping at a patch of weeds. Silas watched her go, a small, tattered figure moving with desperate purpose. She was back in minutes, the bags in her hand. Her movements were frantic, but sure. She tore open the bottle of whiskey, her eyes never leaving his. "This will hurt," she rasped. "Get on with it," he ground out. She poured the liquor over the wound. Silas roared, a sound that was half agony. He arched his back, and she pressed him down, her small hands surprisingly strong. She packed the wound with a clean cloth and then, finding no more, ripped a long, clean strip from the hem of her own ruined dress. She wrapped his shoulder, her brow furrowed, her lips moving in a silent prayer or curse. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, breathing hard. He was pale, covered in a cold sweat, but the bleeding had slowed. "You," spoke he managed. She touched her throat, as if surprised. She looked at her hands, stained with his blood and her own dried tears. He was going to ... double quotes, "I know." Silas clamped his good hand on her arm. "You saved me, Ilara." She helped him to his feet. The world tilted, but he leaned on her, and she held him. They stood for a moment, two survivors in a gravel graveyard, the bodies of their pursuers a stark testament to the morning's violence. "The town," Silas said, nodding west. "Redemption. Still have to get there." "Buster is hurt," she said, looking at the horse. Silas saw it now, a dark stain on the gelding's flank, a flesh wound, but the horse was limping. "We walk," Silas said, and so they did. It was a slow, agonizing procession. Silas, leaning on Ilara, his arm a useless, throbbing weight. Ilara, limping from her own raw feet, but her spine straight, and Buster, trailing behind them, dragging his wounded leg. They were a broken, battered trio, but they were moving. They left the riverbed as the sun reached its zenith, climbing into the foothills. The land began to change. The brown and gray gave way to scrub oak and juniper. The air grew thinner, cooler. They walked all day, in a silence that was no longer empty, but shared. They shared the canteen. She redressed his wound. He guided her over the rough terrain. Dusk was falling when they crested the last ridge. Below them, nestled in a high valley, a cluster of yellow lights twinkled like fallen stars. "Redemption," Silas breathed, slumping against her. It took them another hour to reach the town's main street. A small, wiry man with spectacles looked up from a book. "Dear God," the doctor said, rushing forward. "Get him in this chair." Ilara helped him, easing him down. Silas's head swam. The room was warm, safe. "He's been shot," Ilara said, her voice stronger now. "Hours ago. And the horse. I'll see to the horse after. Girl, let's see to him." Doc Samuels was already cutting away the blood-soaked shirt. You're one of the sanctuary folks, ain't you? We heard the Ash Riders. My God, child, your face." Ilara unconsciously touched the caked crimson. "It's just paint," Silas murmured, his eyes slipping closed. "It'll wash off." "Let's get him stable," the doctor said. "Then we'll get you cleaned up." Silas fought to stay awake. He felt the sting of a needle. He watched as the doctor and Ilara worked over him. He saw the doctor hand her a wet cloth. He watched as she began to wipe the red paint from her face. Underneath the grime, she was young, impossibly young, her face pale and sharp. She finished, tossing the red-stained rag into a basin. She looked at her clean hands, then at Silas. He was fading, the pull of exhaustion and blood loss too strong. He'd done it. He'd gotten her here. He'd kept this one safe. His eyes were closing. He felt a hand on his good one. He forced his eyes open one last time. Alara was leaning over him, her face clear, her eyes holding his. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a fierce, fragile light. "Silas," she said, her voice soft, but clear as a bell. He smiled, a faint crack in the grime on his face. He'd pointed the way to redemption, but he hadn't realized he was pointing the way for himself, too. He closed his eyes, and let the darkness take him.